Hello and good evening. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching Gravitas on WION, the only Indian channel with a global perspective that brings you top stories from South Asia. Tonight we take a hard look at the state of play in India-China relations. A former Chinese diplomat speaks about peace between the two Asian neighbours, but only if India hands Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh over to China. Joining me for the discussion tonight are two guests who need no introduction. Jayadev Ranade, a renowned security and intelligence expert, also a keen China watcher, and General S.L. Narasimhan, a decorated officer who served with the Indian Army for 4 decades. Also, I'm joined in the studio by my senior colleague and WION senior editor, Surya Gangadharan. Thank you all and welcome to Gravitas. But first, I want to take a moment or two to put things into context for the viewers of WION. Now, a top former Chinese diplomat involved in boundary negotiations with India, Dai Bingo, has called for an exchange of territory to solve the border issue. In an interview to the Beijing-based magazine called China-India Dialogue, Dai said, and I quote, "The disputed territory in the eastern sector of the China-India boundary, including Tawang, is inalienable from China's Tibet in terms of cultural background and administrative jurisdiction. If the Indian side takes care of China's concerns in the eastern sector of their border, the Chinese side will respond accordingly and address India's concerns elsewhere." Unquote. All right, let's take a look now at China's position. The idea is not new and has been articulated by China before. Basically, it calls for India handing over Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh to China. China has in fact claimed all of Arunachal Pradesh as its own territory. In exchange, China indicated that it could give parts of Aksai Chin in Ladakh to India. Now, in the interview to China-India Dialogue magazine, Dai Bingo said that the ball was in India's court. He said, and again I quote, "China and India are now standing in front of the gate towards a final settlement. The gate is a framework solution based on meaningful and mutually accepted adjustments. Now, the Indian side holds the key to the gate," unquote. And let's spare a moment or two to understand India's position. Now, India says handing over Tawang or Arunachal Pradesh is not acceptable. It goes against the agreement signed with China in April of 2005. Now, it committed both sides to protecting the interests of settled populations in border areas. As for Aksai Chin and Ladakh, it's a desert and of limited value. And Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar was recently in Beijing for talks with the Chinese leadership on a range of issues. Now, the lack of progress on the dispute and continuing intrusions by Chinese troops in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh has seen India step up its own defenses. A new mountain strike corps comprising 1 lakh troops has come up in West Bengal, tasked with securing Arunachal Pradesh. Advanced landing grounds in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh has enabled faster mobilization and movement of troops. Better surveillance technologies have helped troops on the ground to track and intercept Chinese troops before they enter India. All right, then let's dive straight into the debate tonight. Mr. Ranade, I want to begin by asking you, have the Chinese drawn a line in the sand, meaning either this or nothing else? Mr. Ranade, if you can hear me, I wanted to begin by asking you, have the Chinese drawn a line in the sand, meaning either this or nothing else? All right, we'll try to establish that connection with Mr. Ranade, but if I have General Narasimhan on the line now, all right, I'm told he is available. As a military veteran, General Narasimhan, what is your take on the vexed border question?
The border question is something which is not new. There was a freeze in relations between India and China between 1962 and 1988. And when Mr. Rajiv Gandhi made that historic visit to China, the relations started developing and improving. Over a period of time, we have seen, we have signed 3 agreements in 1993, 1996, and 2005. The first 2 were basically to build up the confidence building measures and to maintain peace and tranquility along the border. In 2005, we signed the agreement basically on the political parameters to guide and guiding principles for the settlement of India-China boundary question. Now, this issue of Tawang
Right.
has not come up before that. Basically, what happened was in 2006, when Ambassador Sun Yusei, just prior to Mr. Hu Jintao's visit, made a mention that whole of Arunachal Pradesh they are claiming it to be China's territory. And around the time 2004, we also found increasingly Arunachal Pradesh being referred to as Southern Tibet. They call it Xizang in Tibet. Tibet is called as Xizang.
Right.
They started calling it as Southern Tibet. So from that time onwards, there have been a push. From that time onwards, there has been a push basically to involve more and more of Arunachal Pradesh into the discussions.
All right.
And it does not mean that it is a no-go. Basic thing is both sides have been actually negotiating, and somewhere down the line, I am sure they'll be able to find some kind of a solution based on the 2005 agreement that has been signed by both India and China.
All right. Coming to you, Surya. Now, there we heard General Narasimhan say share his thoughts. Now, if I were to ask you, is a land swap inevitable? I mean, realistically speaking, can there be any other possible solution or scenario?
This is something that General Narasimhan and I were discussing a little while ago. The fact is that the land which is much of it is in occupation by the Chinese, and they're not going to give it to you for nothing.
Right.
And either way, at some point, we'll have to concede the fact that we don't control this territory. China holds the cards, they have the leverage. And maybe at some point we'll have to accept that, But perhaps the time is not now, because any attempt by anybody to come to a deal with the Chinese on the land issue is going to create a stink all over the country. So perhaps you'll just have to wait it out.
All right, I'm told we are now joined by Mr. Jayadev Ranade. Good evening, Mr. Ranade. I want to begin by asking you, in your estimation, have the Chinese drawn a line in the sand? In other words, either this or nothing else?
No, I don't think so. I think they're restating an old position.
Okay.
In September 2005 is when they actually raised Tawang specifically by name, and they have continued discussing it. So have we. I don't think there is any question of our having a compromise where we give up Tawang. So there will have to be some other solution that is found. But as far as compromising on this, I doubt it. I think Tai Ping-ko, who has raised this earlier also in his official capacity,
Right.
and the Chinese who have raised this earlier also are aware of it. So what they're doing is repackaging old wine in new bottles and trying to see whether, something else, India could come up with something else. In any case, the offer, as I read in the newspapers, is not something that we can accept, because we are getting nothing in the Western sector.
All right, Mr. Ranade, before you joined us on the discussion tonight, I was asking Surya in the studio is whether a land swap is inevitable. Now, if not a land swap, then Mr. Ranade, what else? What other solutions do you fancy or visualize going forward?
Well, land swap in if we are looking at certain areas being given up or not of military interest to either side, that is possible. But when you're talking about settled populations, when you're
Right.
talking on which incidentally we've signed an agreement that they will not be disturbed, then I don't see that as feasible at all. Arunachal is so integrated into the Indian Union, and it is so much a part of the Indian Union, that I do not anticipate this situation coming up at all. India and China will have to seek some other modus vivendi, some other method. And as far as compromise is concerned, let me just point out that they have started referring to Arunachal Pradesh as Southern Tibet from about 2005, 2006. And they've started referring to Ladakh as Little Tibet. That is as recently as 2013. So this can go on, and if we start making concessions, how far will we go along that slippery slope, I wonder.
Absolutely. General Narasimhan, I want you to dwell a bit on whether to allow or not allow the Chinese a sub-Himalayan presence. Now, as a military veteran, militarily speaking, is that a complete no-no for you?
I would say yes. Basically, if you recall, the McMahon line which was drawn, that was accepted in some form when Chinese resolved the boundary with Myanmar in 1960 based on the McMahon line. The same thing is applicable, should be applicable to us also. Basically, that followed a principle of watershed, and anything south of watershed means we'll be at a tactical disadvantage.
Right.
Coming onto the western sector, again, Chinese have already come into the places where they actually wanted to be, and that is where the line of actual control at the moment lies. And there has been a difference in perception of the line of actual control in the Aksai Chin area. So based on these, if some negotiation could be done, that would be worthwhile. Otherwise, I would suggest that we should not go south of the watershed.
All right, coming to you, Mr. Ranadena, looking at how successive Indian governments have handled the issue, from Atal Bihari Vajpayee to Manmohan Singh and now to Narendra Modi, all have taken incremental steps towards an eventual resolution. But are there some decisions that India could have avoided? For instance, Mr. Vajpayee agreed to Tibet as a part of China in 2003. Similarly, Manmohan Singh agreed to the political parameters and guiding principles, and also that settled populations will not be disturbed. So, in hindsight, what could India have acted differently going forward?
Well, I think when Prime Minister Vajpayee made his statement about Tibet, etc., he got Chinese to agree that Sikkim is a part of the Indian Union. So that was a fair exchange, if you ask me. Tibet was already with them. As far as the agreement on not disturbing settled populations, that is an agreement that works to our advantage. The Chinese, of course, are now trying to back out of it. But the fact is that they've signed it, and that takes care of the Tawang issue. So there's no question of Tawang being given back, and that has been agreed to. I think so far, the successive governments have kept national interest in mind. The question is whether they have hung firm or not on issues concerning incursions, etc. And I think we are generally holding firm. And particularly now, I think the position is quite firm as far as border incursions are concerned. And therefore, other areas can be opened up for discussion.
All right. General Narasimhan, is it time India revisited its Tibet policy? Maybe take a more assertive position vis-a-vis Tibet? Also, with Trump in the White House, do you see scope for maneuver for India?
What I would suggest is India-China relations should be dealt with bilaterally. Any involvement of a third party will only complicate the issues further. As far as raising the Tibet issue is concerned, we have already given our position starting from 1965 onwards. We have said that the Tibet Autonomous Region is a part of China. And basic thing is, the problem that comes up in India-China relations is the Tibet government that is in exile in India. And today, you found in the media that His Holiness Dalai Lama is going to visit Arunachal Pradesh, which the Chinese have already protested against.
Right.
They have been actually protesting against anybody going to Arunachal Pradesh. May it be the Prime Minister of India, may it be His Holiness Dalai Lama, whosoever it is. So they are sensitive to that issue. So to that extent, what I would suggest is that we need to find a solution by carrying out this dialogue and holding on to a position that we have been holding on to as earlier. Creating further vitiated atmosphere, I am not sure whether it will work to our advantage.
All right, coming to you, Surya, how would you evaluate the contemporary India-China relations in view especially of Foreign Secretary Jaishankar's visit to China for what is known as the restructured strategic dialogue?
You know, in science fiction, there's a term called stasis, where you neither move forward or backward. There's no movement at all.
Right.
it's like in a vacuum. So we seem to be in that position, sticking to old positions because, well, frankly, there's no movement either way. And perhaps the Chinese are a little more hardline now than they were earlier. Maybe there's something about the Modi persona that they haven't quite liked. But there's been a distinct hardening of Chinese positions, although as far as transgressions are concerned, I believe that they've been less last year.
Okay. Mr. Ranade, now 19 rounds of special representative talks have taken place. Nothing, zilch outcome. Do you think the process has outlived its utility? And why doesn't China adhere to a one India policy, if I may ask you?
Well, firstly, your first part of your question, we have tranquility on the borders. So obviously the talks are good.
Okay.
I mean, they're making some progress, keeping peace. And I think and we are continuing to explore ways, both sides are. I don't think it is in the interest of either country at present to have any kind of conflagration. Secondly, your second part of your question
about one India
whether,
policy.
China and one India policy. I think the Chinese have not responded. You recall our External Affairs Minister, Ms. Sushma Swaraj, had made that statement. Now we have to follow it through if we want to. It will provoke the Chinese if we do. But I think we'll have to look at that in case the situation deteriorates. But right now, we must impress on the Chinese that they have to look at a one China policy and they have to reverse the position that their Foreign Minister Wang Yi took when he came here. And in response to Sushma Swaraj's comment, he reiterated the Chinese position on Arunachal Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir. Both were described as disputed territories. So I think it's a long road ahead. We will have to pressure the Chinese. And as far as the Chinese are concerned, they are not, I think, very willing at the moment to listen to us. They think they are much stronger. And what we are seeing is a hardening of the Chinese state, making it less flexible. So it will take some time before there is progress on that front.
All right.
In my view.
Fair enough. General Narasimhan, some say China only understands the language of power. If that is so, what can and should India do? Does India at all have any levers? Do you think Indian governments and Indian establishments by nature are extra cautious when it comes to dealing with China?
This generally is known as the 1962 syndrome. That is no more there. It was there in the initial stages after the war. Slowly and steadily, when India improved its own power, the military and the economic power and the diplomatic power, it slowly waned away over a period of time. At the moment, I don't think that we are actually extra cautious as to how China will feel or China will do.
What if I rephrase my question, say, is India being diffident or continues to remain diffident when it comes to China, if you don't like the word extra cautious?
Fine. Whether you say extra cautious or diffident, I am of the opinion that we are not diffident anymore.
Okay.
What the opinion gets formed is basically what is being reported in the media. Actually, what is happening in the official circles is not known to many people. I have been privy to a lot of discussions, and India has been actually forthright in putting across its points to the Chinese, and they have not been different at all in any manner.
All right, Mr. Ranade, I want to expand the ambit of our discussion a bit and talk about the 14th Dalai Lama. Now, the question which everyone is confronted with is, what after the 14th Dalai Lama? Is India prepared for the day after, as it were?
Well, he hasn't yet divulged his mind.
I know it's an unfortunate question to ask, but under the circumstances, it remains a valid question, no doubt.
Absolutely, but there are so many possibilities. There could be reincarnation, there could be an emanation, there may not be a Dalai Lama. I mean, I'm just quoting him.
Sure.
But obviously, India is, I'm sure, at the right levels preparing for a possibility of, maybe a reincarnation and may even be on Indian soil if he is so found. Then what to do? And I'm sure they're taking steps to look at that. The Chinese, as you know, have already announced that the next Dalai Lama will be decided by them, and so that there's no question on that.
Right.
So I think we are looking at a possibility if I may suggest, of 2 Dalai Lamas maybe, in which case this kind of tension between the Dalai Lama and the Chinese might continue. Of course, this is speculation, but let us see where it goes.
All right, coming back to you, General Narasimhan, what about the militarization of Tibet? How do you look at it, and what possibly could India be doing about it?
This militarization of Tibet is something which has been, I wouldn't say militarization, what I would say, the tightening of the security situation in Tibet has been going on for a while.
Fair enough.
I have visited Tibet at least thrice, and what one sees is there is a tight control over the population there. That remains. That's an understatement to say that. But other than that, if you look at the border areas, there has been no change in the deployment that used to be there earlier, and we don't see much of increased activity at the moment. They are stuck to wherever they were earlier. But the security situation in Tibet is really tight, and thorough monitoring is being done of all the people out there.
All right, I want to come to Surya for your closing thoughts. Now, Surya, we heard Mr. Ranade and General Narasimhan speak there. Do you at all see light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, where do India-China relations go from here? And are you anticipating more of the status quo, or do you think change is beginning to take shape?
If by status quo you mean resolution of the border, I don't see that happening in the course of the next maybe 15, 20 years.
Okay.
Unless by some miracle, you know, things change in China, perhaps there's unrest of some kind, the government's control weakens. I don't see any change in that happening. As far as economic ties go, perhaps there's scope for improvement there, especially in terms of India's deficit. Whether the Chinese are willing to address that positively is something we still haven't seen much of.
So, competition more than cooperation?
Perhaps, yes. I think I see more of competition.
All right. On that note, I want to thank my guests, Jaidev Ranade and Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan, for joining me tonight on Gravitas and sharing their thoughts on India-China relations. Time for a short break. More news on the other side. Stay tuned to Gravitas.